Hey folks, so I get asked a lot to talk about UK weapons laws. As many of you know, there's currently some proposed legislation being put to consultation by the Home Office, but I'm not going to talk about that really in this video. What I'm specifically going to look at are the 19 offensive weapons. Now that term is somewhat confusing in British law, but before I say any more, I have to state straight up that I'm not qualified to give legal advice. So I'm not a lawyer, I've never studied law, and I have to put that as a disclaimer right at the beginning. Literally all I'm going to do is go through the 19 offensive weapons, and I'll qualify that in a second, under UK law as they're currently listed on the government's own website. Okay, so I'm simply going to be reading the information and then doing a little bit of discussion about whether that makes any sense, that object is on there. Okay, also the thing I want to mention straight up at the beginning is that being that I'm a fencing instructor, martial arts instructor, I've worked over the last 20 years with many different types of people, including doctors, lawyers, civil servants, all IT professionals, all sorts of people from all sorts of walks of life, all ages, both genders and everything else. And some of those people have been military and police personnel. And now, one of the things that I've become very aware of, I had a strong suspicion based on the newspapers and you know, documentaries I've watched and everything else, that the vast majority of knife crime in the UK is committed with kitchen knives. And people I've spoken to confirm this to be the case. Okay, so I know several people working in different police forces at the moment, and it seems to be, although there doesn't seem to be any official statistic, it seems to be that roughly 90, perhaps as high as 95% of all knife crime, or shall we say all violent acts committed with a knife, because knife crime can cover many different sins, but roughly 90-95% of woundings, should we say, with knives are done with kitchen knives. And of course, just as I always say and always make in all of these sort of discussions, you can't get rid of kitchen knives. Every house in the UK has knives in it, has kitchen knives in it, and no matter how many weapons the Home Office adds to the offensive weapons list that's currently sitting at 19 objects, and that some of them really are objects and they're not knives, no matter how many things you add to that, there will still be kitchen knives, ergo everybody stabbing someone else will still be able to stab someone else. Okay, so adding more things, more items to the offensive weapons list achieves absolutely nothing. And you could even argue that it achieves less than nothing, because it means that the Home Office and the civil servants writing that legislation and the ministers agreeing it and it being debated in Parliament, so parliamentary time and everything else, you could argue that those resources are being taken up with ridiculous, meaningless, useless legislation when they could actually be devoting money, time and resources to actually dealing with the problem of gangs, for example, in certain parts of London, stabbing each other. But no, they choose not to do that. They choose to spend their time adding more objects which are not actually used in crime to the offensive weapons list, which achieves nothing. Right, now there's the end of my little political rant. So let's now go on and have a look at the 19 objects that are currently on that list. As mentioned, the term offensive weapons is somewhat problematic as far as I can tell in UK law. And again, I'm not a legal professional, but essentially anything that is intended to be used as a weapon becomes an offensive weapon. But separate to that, we have this list of 19 offensive weapons, which are, by their inherent nature, you're not allowed to buy or sell or exchange, trade them, whatever, and obviously not to carry them around. Currently, these weapons are legal to own on private premises if you either bought them before they became illegal, or simply you have it handed down to you and your family, or something, some strange kind of situation. But there is currently a proposal that the Home Office has launched, and there's a consultation on at the moment. There'll be a link below to basically make it so it is also illegal to have these things on your premises, even if you bought them before they became illegal. But anyway, let's have a look at these 19 objects. So first up we have a knuckle duster. As they describe a knuckle duster, that is a band of metal or other hard material worn on one or more fingers and designed to cause injury, and any weapon incorporating a knuckle duster. So this is sort of problematic because basically it's, to use Scallagrim's term, it's legalese, in that it's quite difficult to interpret what this actually means. A band of metal or other hard material worn on one or more fingers and designed to cause injury. So if you make something that looks exactly like a knuckle duster, but it's not a hard material, let's say it's rubber, then I don't think that's covered under this. I don't think, but again, I'm not a lawyer. Or indeed, if you make something of a hard material or metal, but it's not designed to cause injury, then it's not a knuckle duster? I don't really know. And of course, there are lots of objects that can be used as knuckle dusters, like a carabiner, for example, or any type of ring that you can hold around your hand, or, you know, just something even you wrap around your hand. Certain types of ring, I mean, it says worn on one or more fingers and designed to cause injury. You could say, is a diamond engagement ring that is designed to cause injury, does that become a knuckle duster? How do you decide whether it's designed to cause injury? I just don't know. Obviously, in common legal use, most people know what a knuckle duster is, and I'm sure that most policemen would take a pragmatic view and say, well, look, we know what a knuckle duster is, that's prohibited, but something that's, you know, like a diamond engagement ring is not. Okay, but nevertheless, the words of this legislation are really clunky and clumsy and very open to misinterpretation. Let's move on to the next one. So next up is a sword stick. Well, a sword stick on paper, we all know what a sword stick is, don't we? That is a hollow walking stick or cane containing a blade which may be used as a sword. Well, yet again, this is open to all sorts of misinterpretation. So a hollow walking stick or cane, could that be a scabbard? Could it just be a sword? We don't know. Probably not. We say that essentially it seems to be that what they're trying to say is something that looks like a walking stick or a cane, but has a concealed sword inside it. But notice that it specifically says which may be used as a sword. Well, what does that mean, used as a sword? Does that mean to cut and thrust? Does it mean to fence with? Does it mean to reenact the Battle of Waterloo with? Is therefore a knife stick, shall we say, a sword stick which has a blade of, let's say, 10 inches long. 10 inches long is not long enough to use like a sword. So does that mean that a sword stick with a short blade is not an offensive weapon on this list? It's just not really very clear. It's not clear at all. And I should also add that antique versions of all of these offensive weapons are exempt or are accepted or have a defence under the law, as far as I have read it and as far as everybody else I know has interpreted it. So an antique sword stick is not an offensive weapon. A modern sword stick is. Anyway, let's move on to the next one. So next up we have the weapon sometimes known as a hand claw, being a band of metal or other hard material from which a number of sharp spikes protrude and worn around the hand. I don't really know where to start with this one. I mean, I can clearly see what they're supposed to be talking about. There are certain types of Indian weapon that are modelled on tiger's claws, and I believe there's certain types of sort of Japanese, in parenthesis, ninja weapons, which clearly is probably what this is aiming at. But nevertheless, a band of metal that goes around the hand and has a number of sharp spikes protruding from it. I don't know, I mean, that to me it sounds like it could even cover certain types of bracelet, or maybe that you would say that's not around the hand and it's around the wrist. I just don't really know. Why is this on there? Was there some epidemic in the 1980s of people running around with hand claws scratching each other? Really don't know. A bit of a weird one there, but let's move on to the next one. So next up we have the weapon sometimes known as a belt buckle knife, being a buckle which incorporates a concealed knife. Well, you know, I'm going to say perhaps what you might not be expecting, and that kind of makes sense. I get where they're coming from. It's a concealed knife, isn't it? And I kind of understand why the police and the Home Office should indeed want to prohibit specifically covert knives. You might not agree with it, but I can understand the logic of it. And why would someone want to hide a knife by design in a belt buckle. It is only so that they can walk around with a knife with them on at all times, isn't it? You're not going to wear it around the house, and in UK law at least, you can't walk around the streets with a knife unless it's got a non-locking sub 3-inch blade, in other words a penknife. So I can sort of see the sense of this, so I'm not going to talk any more about that one. The next one to talk about is actually can be a related weapon to the belt buckle knife, and that is, as they say, the weapon sometimes known as a push dagger, being a knife where the handle of which fits within a clenched fist and the blade of which protrudes from between two fingers. Now, I find this one particularly interesting because we all know what a punch dagger is, and we know what a European or American antique punch dagger looks like. Antiques, by the way, of course, are exempt from this. So a modern made push dagger, we know what that looks like. And I know a lot of people who have interpreted this as prohibiting a weapon like the katar as well, the Indian katar. And what's interesting is, up until the very last few words, a katar would be prohibited, but then notice that it says the blade of which protrudes from between two fingers. Well, a katar, that is not the case. So in functional purposes, certainly a kitchen knife is just as dangerous as this, and obviously I will keep coming back to that point, that you can ban all of these things, but someone can still just buy a carving knife from, an over 18-year-old at least, can buy a carving knife from the supermarket, and the knife will probably be better steel with a sharper edge than any of the commonly made crappy kind of wall hanger weapons discussed here. But nevertheless, it's very clear, a push dagger. Well, there we go, a push dagger is on the offensive weapons list, but only if the blade protrudes between two fingers. If it protrudes between 3 fingers, if it has like 2 stalks, then presumably it's not covered, or indeed if it doesn't protrude between any fingers, it's not covered. Anyway, let's move on to the next one. So next up we have the weapon sometimes known as a hollow kubotan, being a cylindrical container containing a number of sharp spikes. I just don't really know what to say about that one. So a cylindrical container containing a number of sharp spikes. Okay. I can probably think of several tools and mechanical things which have a cylindrical container containing a number of sharp spikes, but it's just so weird that this is on here. Was there ever a time where gangs were running around with hollow kubotans spiking each other? I don't even know really what they would do to each other with this weapon. It's just really weird that it's on there, and it comes back to this theme that we find when we look at the UK offensive weapons list, that they do not like Japanese weapons. Man, they don't like Japanese weapons. They don't mind Indian weapons or African weapons or European weapons. They really don't like Japanese stuff, especially if it's got any association with ninjas, because clearly the UK government is really, really scared of ninjas. They're not scared of gangs stabbing each other with kitchen knives or shooting each other, but they are really, really scared of ninjas. Anyway, let's move on to the next one. Next up, a bit like the hand claw, the weapon sometimes known as a foot claw, being a bar of metal or other hard material from which a number of sharp spikes protrude and worn strapped to the foot. Again, ninja weapon that is so specific in its description. What are they actually trying to legislate against here? If someone really wants to use a foot claw, why have they said worn strapped to the foot? There are other ways to attach it to the foot. Surely if you just made a shoe with a load of spikes bolted to it, it wouldn't actually fall under this kind of categorisation, because it wasn't strapped to the foot. Or you say the shoe was strapped to the foot, I suppose. It's just really, really weird. When was there ever someone running around injuring, kicking someone in the shins, presumably, I don't think you're going to kill many people, with a bar of metal or other hard material with a number of sharp spikes protruding from the foot? Very, very weird. Why is this even on here? It's just taking up valuable ink and paper. But anyway, let's move on to the next one. And the next one I've got a bit more to say about. So this is one of my favourite ones on the list. Of course, yet again, ninja weapon, because the UK government is freaking terrified of ninjas. Gangs, terrorists, not a problem. Ninjas are the real problem that we're facing today, or at least in 1988. The weapon sometimes known as a Shuriken, a Shaken, or a Death Star. That's right. That's right, folks, you heard it here. The Empire stands no chance in the UK because Death Stars are on the offensive weapons list. Don't come here trying to blow up our planet, because that is an offensive weapon. It is described being a hard, non-flexible plate having 3 or more sharp radiating points and designed to be thrown. Well, there we go. I guess we all actually know what a shuriken is. It is a thing. Why is it on this list? I don't know. I mean, I think that I do have a vague memory of when I was a child in the 1980s, that there was a brief fashion for people buying shurikens and chucking them around. So I can kind of understand why this is on here, but in practical terms, who is this keeping safe? I mean, in reality, it's probably only keeping teenage kids safe who think it's cool to buy a shuriken and throw it into the garden fence and sometimes miss and hit their neighbour. It's not the kind of thing that's going to be used by gangs. It's not even the kind of thing that is really going to be fatal to anyone, is it? Because let's face it, shurikens have teeny tiny little blades. They're usually only about, 1 to 2 inches long, if that. They're not going to. You're certainly not going to kill anyone with a shuriken. At worst, you'll just give them a nasty little wound that they'll have to get a couple of stitches in, which frankly you could get from the garden mower or the kitchen knife or a pair of scissors or a screwdriver or all of the other pointy objects that are surrounding us all the time, every day. But anyway, and also notice they have used language which I would suggest would have been unwise in legal terms, because they've said designed to be thrown. So if you can make something that looks like a shuriken and prove that it is not designed to be thrown, then somehow it magically doesn't get covered under this description anymore. Very weird. And also, what stops someone throwing a kitchen knife at someone? Nothing at all. And in fact, a kitchen knife, if it lands point first, which admittedly takes more skill than throwing a shuriken, but if you take a kitchen knife and throw it at someone, it is going to do a lot more damage than throwing a shuriken at them. Or indeed, I would suggest, darts. The popular British game of darts, as featured on the TV show Bullseye throughout my childhood. I would imagine that a typical dart from your local pub would do more damage to someone than a shuriken will. But anyway, I can kind of see why this is on here, because presumably it was to stop teenagers from throwing, or kids should we say, throwing shurikens around in their gardens and occasionally injuring a passerby. Right, let's move on to the next one. Next on the list is the weapon sometimes known as a balisong or butterfly knife. I have to say, as far as I'm concerned, a butterfly knife is actually a type of Chinese short sword, not a balisong. So I'm now somewhat confused. Are they banning butterfly knives or are they banning balisongs? Well, from the description, we know it's actually a balisong that they're banning. I personally have never heard a balisong referred to as a butterfly knife. Maybe it was some confused civil service, or it was a Friday afternoon, I don't know. Anyway, it says, being a blade enclosed by its handle, which is designed to split down the middle without the operation of a spring or other mechanical means to reveal the blade. So what's really interesting here is if you made a balisong with a spring or a mechanical means, it would no longer be an offensive weapon, I presume. Again, they've used too many words and they've shot themselves in the foot. We all know what a balisong is. If they just said balisongs are banned, we'd go, well, okay, we all know what a balisong is. But instead they said the blade is enclosed by its handle. Well, I'm sure there's ways that you could make a balisong so the blade isn't literally enclosed by the handle. And it says splits down the middle. Well, again, you could make it so it didn't split down the middle exactly. It could split to one side, maybe on one of the sides. It doesn't have to split down the middle, without the operation of a spring or other mechanical means. Well, you could introduce a spring in there, couldn't you? So it sprung open, and therefore it wouldn't be covered by this anymore. Very, very poor civil servanting there. Poor use of language. But anyway, and does it make any sense sort of in terms of people's safety? Well, no, not really. I suppose the only thing you could say is it's a locking knife, essentially. Once it's open, is it any more dangerous than a normal lock knife, or is it any more dangerous than a hunting knife, fishing knife, filleting knife, kitchen knife, carving knife, butcher's knife, meat cleaver, machete, scissors, screwdriver, any of the other objects that we can legally buy off the shelves of the shop? No, not really. It will just make a hole in someone just the same as any other knife will. And as we know, kitchen knives are what normally do that. Right, let's move on to the next weapon. So next on the list we have the weapon sometimes known as a telescopic truncheon, being a truncheon which extends automatically by hand pressure applied to a button, spring or other device in or attached to its handle. It is specifically a telescopic truncheon with a mechanical device inside to make it extend via the pressure of a button. The weapon, sometimes known as a blowpipe or blowgun, being a hollow tube out of which pellets or darts are shot by the use of breath. Well, you know, lots of people have spoken about this, and it's like, why is this on here? It's absolutely crazy. I mean, blowpipes, unless you use poison, are pretty much harmless. I mean, all you can do with a blowpipe is maybe break a glass if you use a ball bearing, or maybe get a little dart to stick in some cardboard, or maybe kind of, I just don't know. I mean, it's a pea shooter, isn't it? Who hasn't at some point in their school lives taken a biro, taken the top and bottom off and put a screwed up piece of paper in it and blown it? You are now in possession of an offensive weapon. That's right. Every kid that blows screwed up paper through a biro is in possession of an offensive weapon, on school property no less. I expect they'll have to be taken away from their parents and stuck in a young offenders institution for 10 years. I just don't know. It's just bizarre. Why is this on here? Blowpipes are only useful in like the world, in history, ethnographically, culturally, if you use poison. Okay, you just can't shoot them with any force to really injure anyone unless you use poison. They're always used with poison for hunting in South America. And you know, at the end of the day, what is an air gun? An air gun or an airsoft gun or a paintball gun? They're all kind of blowpipes, but you know what? They're more effective because they have mechanical devices and gas to expel the things that they're shooting, and therefore they're more powerful than a blowpipe because a blowpipe's rubbish. Anyway, it's just bizarre that this is on the list. And you're criminalising all children that play with biros and screwed up paper. It's just very, very weird. What are you doing? We're back to ninjas again. Good old ninjas. After blowpipes. Well, let's bear in mind, of course, that ninjas do use blowpipes. So that's probably why they're on the list, because we've established that the UK government is not scared of terrorism, is not scared of riots or demonstrators or anything else or gangs. They're scared of ninjas. And we get back to ninjas again fully. We go full ninja again. The weapon sometimes known as a kusari gama, being a length of rope, cord, wire or chain fastened at one end to a sickle. Okay, so I think we all know that sickles are actually kind of used by, you know, gardeners and farmers and stuff. So sickles are not an offensive weapon. You can go to B&Q or Wickes or Homebase and buy a sickle. So you can buy a sickle, but, you know, heaven forbid that you should tie a piece of string to your sickle. Let me warn you people, and again, I'm not a lawyer, so this is not official legal advice, but I would suggest, as a responsible UK citizen, that if you tie a piece of string to your sickle, that becomes an extremely offensive weapon, and you are a criminal. So yeah, weird. There we go. Let's move on to the next one. And we're with ninjas yet again. Oh my, how many of these 19 are actually ninja weapons? The weapon sometimes known as a manriki gusari or kusari, being a length of rope, cord, wire or chain, fastened at each end to a hard weight or hand grip. Hold on. A piece of cord with a hand grip at one end and a hard weight at the other end? You've just criminalised fishing. What are you doing? I literally think in 1988, the Home Office, it must have been an extremely quiet year. And perhaps it was a cold winter, and a Home Office civil servant stayed up late one night, probably drinking, and watched a ninja film and came into work the next day absolutely terrified by the prospect of all these ninja weapons that could be unleashed on the UK government and on poor innocent UK citizens. It's just bizarre, isn't it? So a manriki kusari, what is it? Well, the actual ninja weapon is, as it describes, it's a length of rope, cord, wire or chain, so it's a length of something flexible with two hard things at either end. But first of all, like, what are you going to do with that? It's literally, okay, so when you're towing a car, you've got two hard things connected, but so it is, when you're towing a car, are you in possession of an offensive weapon? It's just bizarre. Why is this even on the list? Who was ever hurt by an actual officially made ninja kusari. I just don't know. But what they've done with this really amateurish, like it was written by 5-year-olds, description of the weapon, is they've said anything which has cord or wire, or rope, which has a hard weight at one end and a hand grip at the other end, is an offensive weapon. So a fishing rod. So you know, a fishing rod, or basically anything else with two things attached at either end of it. Just bizarre. This needs to be taken off. And you know, I'm not going to beat around the bush. More than half of these objects, and I would even argue all 19, just need to be removed. They're not doing the police any favours, they're not doing the government any favours, they're certainly not doing UK citizens any favours. Why are they there? They're just completely bizarre and useless, and they do nothing to reduce crime at all. In fact, technically they increase crime, because they make things which aren't really a crime and which shouldn't be regarded as a crime into a crime. So, you know, it's just bizarre. Right, let's move on to the, let's just look at the next one on the list. A disguised knife. That is any knife which has a concealed blade or concealed sharp point and is designed to appear to be an everyday object. A telephone, a cat, of kind commonly carried on the person or in a handbag, briefcase, or other hand luggage. They got a bit carried away here with containers you can carry things in, such as a comb, brush, writing instrument, cigarette lighter, key, lipstick, or telephone. Yeah, okay, so this is, again, it's a stealth knife, isn't it? And it's funny because the next object on the list is a stealth knife. Let's just go straight into that, because I think that we can deal with both of these in one go. So the next object, which is kind of the same thing, they've kind of said the same thing twice here. So you could say there aren't 19 objects on this list, there's actually 18. A stealth knife, that is a knife or spike which is a blade or a sharp point made from a material that is not readily detectable by apparatus used for detecting metal and which is not designed for domestic use or the use of processing, preparation or consumption of food, or as a toy. Right, so all that this extra one has done is it's brought in the non-metallic nature of the blade. So they're talking about, you know, ceramic or plastic materials. So we're talking again about stealth or covert knives that are designed to be hidden, concealed around the person or in an object that wouldn't usually have a weapon inside it, and can be deployed in a, you know, in a way quickly. This is kind of similar to the belt knife. Again, you could say that the belt knife doesn't need to be on this list because it's already covered under the disguised knife one. So again, we're perhaps boiling down from 19, we've got down from 18 to 17. So they've essentially mentioned several things more than once in this list of 19. Is there a need to ban these? I don't really think so, and this is my argument for why. We've established that probably 90%, I can only say probably because there's no official statistics, but probably 90% or higher of all violent knife crime is done with a kitchen knife. Those kitchen knives are taken, many of them of course are used in the house in domestic violence, but many of them are taken out of the house onto the street, and you know, they're not disguised as something else, they're just hidden. So if you've got gangs walking around the streets of certain parts of London with kitchen knives stuffed down their trousers, then really, is there an awful lot of point in banning a stealth knife of a non-metallic material? Yeah, okay, you could creep it onto an aeroplane, all this kind of stuff. I suppose that's what they're thinking about. I can kind of understand the logic. But at the end of the day, we've established the vast majority, like nearly all, of violent knife crime is done with kitchen knives. So, and you know, if someone's going to carry a knife on themselves, it doesn't actually really matter whether it's disguised or not, because they'll just stuff it down their trousers. And it's only when you do a stop and search that you will discover either the disguised knife or the hidden knife. Anyway, I can kind of understand the government's logic. I'm not gonna sort of belabor the point too much, because I do kind of understand where they're getting at. They're trying to ban things that can be snuck into places where there are safety measures in place, like metal detectors, but you might be able to get them past by disguising the knife or whatever. Yeah, okay, I kind of accept that. I don't have a big problem with it, but I do think that it doesn't make a real difference to crime on a grand scale for the whole kitchen knife reason, because gangs are going to get kitchen knives, they can always get kitchen knives, and they can always carry kitchen knives. Anyway, let's move on to the next one. The next one is problematic in many ways: a straight, side-handled or friction lock Truncheon, sometimes known as a baton. Right, so this is actually where the extending baton, I think, would get covered under. So the type of extending batons that are very popular amongst UK police, not because they're effective, but because they're easy to carry. Traditional truncheons are hit far more effectively, and the police admit this, but the fact is that traditional truncheon is a nuisance to carry around, and when you're getting in and out of cars, it is a nuisance. And so what often happens is the police take off the truncheon, and then when they get out of their car to run after someone, they realise they don't have their truncheon with them. So friction lock extending truncheons are very useful because they mean that a policeman can have it on them at all times. Well, under this addition to the offensive weapons list, it does indeed seem that normal civilians can't own them. Why? We don't really know. They're less effective than a stick. They're less effective than a baseball bat or a pickaxe handle. So I suppose you could say it comes under the disguised or the covert or the stealth aspect again, which the UK government, I think perhaps to some degree rightly, is concerned about. With a friction lock truncheon, you could go into somewhere and have a friction lock, a folding telescopic truncheon concealed on your body, concealed in your clothes, and pull it out and deploy it. Yeah, okay, I can kind of understand that. Side-handled or straight truncheon, well, this is more problematic, isn't it? Because what is a straight or side-handled truncheon? What qualifies it as being a truncheon or a baton? Well, what's a baseball bat? Isn't a baseball bat a straight truncheon? What is a, let's say, something like a golf club? That's certainly a straight club, isn't it? It is even called a club. What is a club? Well, a club is a type of truncheon, or a bludgeon, or a cudgel. What about a hockey stick, or basically just a stick from a tree? Is a stick with a tree that happens to have a branch sticking out sideways out of it, is that suddenly become a side-handled truncheon? I just don't really know. This is so vague, this one, with the exception of the friction lock truncheon, which we all understand what that means. What is a straight side-handled, or straight or side-handled truncheon? It's just so nebulous. It's just so, you know, what qualifies something as a truncheon? Anyway, there's not much more I can say about that. I think this one's ridiculous, really. I can understand why they've put friction lock truncheon on there. Maybe. I don't think it needs to be on there, but I can kind of understand the logic. But the logic for a straight or side-handled truncheon, I can't see any logic at all there. You know, a broken chair which happens to have a bit sticking out the side, that's going to be a side-handled truncheon, isn't it? But I don't think it should be classed as an offensive weapon. Anyway, let's move on to the next one. So with the last two, we get into two objects which have been added in recent years. I think the first one is a sword with a curved blade of 50 centimetres or over in length. And for the purposes of this sub-paragraph, the length of the blade shall be the straight line distance from the top of the handle to the tip of the blade. So I think we understand what a 50 centimetre blade, curved blade is. This has caused a lot of problems, this one, and essentially this was widely known in the newspapers as the samurai sword ban, but as you see from the description, they don't mention samurai, which is amazing because they've spent the entire rest of the list talking about Japanese things, and then they fail to mention Japanese things in this one. But when they brought this law in, it was widely described as a samurai sword ban. As you see, it doesn't only refer to samurai swords at all. In theory, it refers to any curved swords. Now, we know that antiques are exempt, so we don't have to worry about antique swords, luckily, for now, thankfully. But it does cover all curved swords with blades over 50 centimetres. Now, many of you listening to this or watching this will realise that that includes reenactors using blunt light cavalry sabres to reenact the Battle of Waterloo, which they still do, thankfully. And indeed it covers certain types of fencing sword for you know, the harmless sport of fencing with blunt and flexible blades. And this is really the problem, is that this description doesn't define whether the object should be sharp, or it doesn't define what it's used for or anything else. So very quickly after they added this one to the list, the Home Office was forced to bring in certain, what do they call, defences. Now again, I'm not offering official legal advice, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not qualified to do so. But These defences essentially mean that you are guilty until proven innocent. So lots of people in the UK are under the misconception that UK law generally assumes that you're innocent until proven guilty. In the last few decades, this has not been the case. There are many laws which make you guilty until you can prove your innocence. And my understanding, and again, it's my understanding, is that this is one case. I can currently buy a blunt curved sabre for the purposes of fencing under one of the existing defences of this law. Okay, so it is a defence to say that I'm buying it for martial arts practice, and I have to prove that I'm buying it for martial arts or fencing practice. And so I provide, in my case, I provide evidence of my insurance and the fact that I'm a qualified instructor, an insured instructor with the British Combat Association, and they let me purchase that object, and I now own that object. But this is really an unsatisfactory position to be in, because there are literally, I'm not exaggerating when I say there are tens of thousands, and it might even run into hundreds of thousands of UK citizens who are buying and owning curved swords, many of them blunt, probably the majority blunt, and some of them sharp, for the purposes of fencing, reenactment, martial arts, all of these lawful activities that the Home Office doesn't want to prohibit, doesn't want to ban. Let's not pretend that the Home Office wants to stop us from fencing or wants to stop reenactments from happening. They don't care about that, actually. But they've brought in this lumpen piece of legislation that affects so many people. Easily, I mean, we know categorically it's tens of thousands of people, and I suspect if we include all reenactors, all historical fencers, all martial artists, it probably runs into hundreds of thousands of people in the UK. And it's a ridiculous, ridiculous situation to be in. We are assumed to be criminals until we can prove our defence under the law using one of these. It's not an exemption. Don't think it's an exemption. It's a defence. It's a legal defence. So it puts the onus of defence on us for doing something that's completely harmless and legal and of cultural value and historical value. Something that you can go and witness at, Windsor Castle and the Tower of London, and on battlefields like Towton and Tewkesbury and places all over the country. It is just a ludicrous, crazy situation that UK fencers, martial artists and reenactors find themselves in now. I strongly, strongly believe that this 18th weapon on the offensive weapons list needs to be removed or to be redrafted in a far more sensible way, with the advice of a lawyer who has consulted all of the sports and martial arts and historical, cultural, museum activities related and affected by this. And what I would just finally add before I move on to the final weapon on this list is that not only does this affect huge numbers of people currently and cause huge amounts of problem for Border Force, which is, a civil service department who have to deal with imports of these objects and deal with all the paperwork involved with people who are legally importing them. But not only does it affect them, but when they bring in, if the Home Office brings in the new proposal, it will not only make it illegal to buy and sell these objects with a defence possible, but it will also make it illegal to own them, which means that even once you've bought the thing, you at any time could be accused of being a criminal until you've proven your defence. It's a ludicrous, crazy situation to be in, and it needs to be urgently looked at, certainly before the new legislation is enacted. Right, on to the final weapon on the offensive weapons list is the famous zombie knife or zombie killer knife. So let's read the text. The weapon, sometimes known as a zombie knife, a zombie killer knife or a zombie slayer knife, being a blade with a cutting edge, a serrated edge, and images or words, whether on the blade or the handle, that suggest that it is to be used for the purpose of violence. Wow. Yeah, okay, I mean, that's just so specific, isn't it? So there is a specific type of knife called a zombie knife. I am not going to talk very much. Do you know what? I care so little about zombie knives. This is one of the most irrelevant pieces of legislation I have ever seen, and I have worked with legislation due to my job and various other things for many, many years, and this is one of the most irrelevant and pointless bits of legislation I have ever seen. It achieves nothing. Nothing at all. Yes, some gangs were using weapons that are sometimes known as zombie knives to show off, and they're now banned. So what have those gangs done? Do you think that they've gone, oh, you know, gang life just isn't for me, I'm going to go home and watch Coronation Street and The X Factor? Nope. They're still in gangs, they're still carrying knives, but they're just kitchen knives. This is just, you know, and the thing to say about these zombie knives is they're less effective than a kitchen knife. A carving knife is made of better steel and is sharper and is stronger. Most of these zombie knives are what we call wall hangers. They're made of bad steel, they're not very sharp, and they break easily. So there we go, the government's basically banned some of these gang members from using ineffective knives and forced them to go and use more effective knives bought from the local supermarket. Anyway, that was the 19 offensive weapons under UK law. I hope this was somewhat interesting, raises some debate, makes you think a bit. I strongly believe that at least half of these items should not even be on government legislation of any sort. They're meaningless, they achieve nothing, and they achieve less than nothing because they increase the amount of time that the police and border force have to deal with policing this ridiculous list, when most of these things are either harmless or easily obtained, or they describe things which cover lots of other objects which aren't actually weapons, or they're things which are legally being used by people for completely peaceful means. And kitchen knives, always kitchen knives. As we always say, the vast majority of knife woundings are done with kitchen knives in domestic violence and gang violence. Adding these weird and wonderful objects, and some objects which are in common use in sports and fishing and other kinds of stuff, adding these weird and wonderful objects to a magical list on the Home Office website achieves nothing and less than nothing. Just also